Hello everyone and welcome to Van Vehicles Skyscraper 2020. My name is Jason Pritchard and I'm the editor of eVTOLinsights.com, and I'm really happy to be given the opportunity to be part of this virtual summit which focuses on the urban air mobility in Latin America. In this video, I'll be speaking to Don Berchoff, CEO of True Weather Solutions, a weather data analytics company which transitions and takes complex weather data and turns it into simple insights. Don was part of Van Vehicles' 8th think tank about vertiports, and I'll be getting his insight about weather data in Latin America and his views on the different cities in the region. So Don, really good to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time to speak to me.
Thanks for having me today.
Excellent. So could I just start off really then, Don? So with all your years of expertise in weather data, what would you say then are the main starting points that need to be tackled as we start to implement urban air mobility in Latin America?
Well, I think the main starting points are we need to understand that the current weather systems and the current weather infrastructure and even the weather products that are provided by government entities and others are not going to work for this industry. And that's already been proven by the FAA and through a Lincoln Lab MIT study that says that. So the other problem is we know that governments are not going to be able to afford to do all the infrastructure. It's just too expensive. And there's a reason why we haven't, had better weather measurements in the past. And it's because there hasn't been a business case for it and the government doesn't have the resources. So the way I look at this is we need to think about this as a different way to view weather infrastructure, a different business model. And we need to start having that conversation early because, everything we're talking about has a long lead time. And, and when we're talking about building a vertiport or making plans for where to put vertiports, we're talking about where to put routes and how we want to run those routes. We need to build the weather resiliency into the planning. We need to build the weather infrastructure into the planning so that when we do go out and get the budget and the funding for these things, it's already baked in. And to be honest with you, it's going to be budget dust compared to everything else. So if you could just get it in there, and then we can work on the business model and figure out how we're going to, fund these things through maybe fees and through recovering a cost if it's a government entity or a municipality, or for businesses to invest in sensors, and then get that data into our systems and then start running what I call micro models, which are not going to be run by the government. So, we need to then build a system to support what we call the supplemental data service supplier network and weather, which is tied into the UTMs and the, and any other infrastructure, airspace management infrastructure to be built. And we need to make sure that we're tying that into those systems early enough and then building the business case and the business model so we can, get this kind of innovation we need and amortize it, across all this industry. And in the meantime, these data sets will be usable for other industries like air pollution, air quality, for emergency management, emergency operations, for, in case there's ever toxic plume releases and then even in energy, right? There's so many ways we can use this data. The challenge has been there's been no business model to do this for any of those individual industries that was strong enough. So this is the opportunity. So I see this as and we need to get it in the planning. I think that's the key here.
Completely agree, Don. And I think we spoke about it before as well, where we need to have these conversations now, don't we? Because when the eVTOL aircraft get to an operational stage in the next 10 to 15 years, we won't have really all the data, as you say, to sort of help make that a reality, won't we? So what could we learn then from Colombia, as you mentioned with in your presentation about the different terrains? So we've got Bogota with a high altitude, we've got Cartagena, which is next to the sea. Do you think Colombia could kind of lay those foundations for implementing weather systems in similar cities across Latin America?
Absolutely. So, I look for the green space in this area. The bad news is weather costs the world like $1.1 trillion a year. And that's not catastrophic events that you have to rebuild buildings. This is about productivity. This is about using resources. This is about inconvenience that takes people's time away from other things. And it's 1.1 trillion a year. And when I was I'm an retired Air Force veteran. And what I did was in the Air Force is I showed how we could recover 40% of that through some very systematic approaches working with Tanker Airlift Control Center at Air Mobility Command in the United States Air Force. We did it on a global scale. It wasn't, urban modeling, but it was basically, we showed how these airlift tankers were going around the world and they were getting delayed by weather, 5,000 a year. And then they were, that cost about $500 million. And what we did was we just built a risk management framework to better use our data in decisions. And we cut that down to 1,800 a year in 1 year. So we've shown that if you know it, even before you even improve the data, if you just use the data you have and you get it into decision systems and analytics, then you're going to get value already. That's low hanging fruit. And I think when I look at the green spaces, the good news is the systems that are being built for UTM and eVTOLs are all modern architecture systems. So for me to go back and retrofit, United Airlines software or Delta software with these concepts, it's very difficult to do, right? That's, I wrote the next gen weather ConOps with several people in 2005 for the FAA. And 15 years later, we still don't have the weather programs in place. And part of the reason is the companies that need to use that data, they have to have all the legacy software. And so that's a hurdle. What I see here is it's clean, right? So everything we're talking about is easy to do now. It's fungible, data's fungible. And I think Columbia is a place where I see as a clean green space. It doesn't carry all the baggage, legacy baggage that we have in other countries that have very high regulatory requirements. And so I see that as one opportunity to test these new, concepts for how to use weather data. Then the second part of it is in the infrastructure itself, right? So we need to definitely go out. And when I look at Cartagena, which is a coastal area that has sea breezes and fog and then I look at Bogota, which is a high altitude location that has high terrain around it. And has all kinds of squirrely winds if you wanted to go into that terrain a little bit. If you want to fly an air taxi from downtown into some of the hills, it's going to get messy. And I see a lot of potential with all the variety and climate. Now, it doesn't have obviously snow and ice, but I think from a perspective of winds and turbulence and wake turbulence and the things that fog and sealing, I think it has a lot of those characteristics where we can put some sensors out there, look at how we can integrate them into the infrastructure, and we can learn a lot. And my goal is to take what we learn either in a place like Columbia, or I'm also working with the Autonomous Institute in Texas and Dallas. We want to be able to stamp out solutions that could go anywhere around the world. Once we have that systematic approach, and once we do that, I have a vision for how we can do that for weather, and we can basically turn every city into a smart weather city without a whole lot of extra effort if we're involved early in those processes.
Completely agreed on. And I think I really like the idea of those smart weather systems in cities, because I'm sure you'll agree, different cities in not only Latin America, but in the US as well, they're all different. Some are big, some are small. For example, Los Angeles is a big sprawling urban environment, and whereas somewhere in a bit more of the rural states is a bit smaller as well. So I really like that idea of sort of these smart weather systems.
Plus there's diverse climates. So like if you're in San Francisco, the biggest challenge is the marine layer and not knowing from valley to valley if you're going to have fog and stratus, which will impact IFR, and how that moves on an hourly basis or a minute basis versus other cities like Los Angeles will be more around the winds. You have to build your systems also around the climatology and make sure that, we don't let that climatology get in the way of predictability about clients knowing if they're going to get their air taxi or not, and being left to take an Uber on the ground that in traffic won't get them to the airport on time. So the predictability is a big part of that, and it's based on climate also. Yeah.
No, thanks for that, Don, as well. The one thing I was going to ask as well is it must be quite difficult with that predictability, because eVTOL aircraft are not necessarily in the air at the moment. So there's that difficulty, isn't there, of trying to predict how they will operate in weather, as you say, where it's foggy or whether it's cold, or with Bogota being high altitude as well. So does that in a way pose a bit of a challenge before these aircraft are even certified to in the air as well?
Of course. And here's the thing, what I really love is, so here's the thing. So, scientists and engineers, right? We think differently. Engineer is always about precision, and they could solve any weather problem. And scientists know that you can't solve any weather problem because I've been 35 years in aviation, and they've been telling me that we're going to have an all-weather aircraft since I was a lieutenant back in 1985, and I'm still looking for it. I mean, have aircraft gotten better? Yes. Can you fly in more conditions than you could back in 1985? Yes. But you still can't take off if there's a foot of snow on the ground, right? And you still can't fly in areas where you're going to have rapidly changing wind speeds based on the size and weight of your aircraft. I don't care, if you want to engineer that out, it's going to get expensive and it's going to get heavy. So again, then you don't have a business model to move people around, right? So I think it's going to take a while to engineer the weather out. And I mean, I'm not worried about it in my lifetime. And I think that we need to make sure that we have to understand what the capabilities will be. And that's why I stay so closely involved with all the manufacturers, the UTMs. I'm on the ASTM F-38 standards group in the US, and I started the weather group. I was the founder of it. And by the way, I had to convince people weather was important enough to actually, think about in the standards. But the point is that I'm very closely aligned with NASA, FAA, a lot of these operators, and I'm understanding and watching how these aircraft are going to evolve and what is it going to be most likely so I can hit the target, right? We don't want to over emphasize the weather when it's not necessary, but we want to make sure that we don't wish it away. And that's what normally happens. People wish the weather away. They test these systems in the desert, or they test them in good weather conditions, and you really hear about the problems because those aren't good for business. So, I know all this because I used to work with aircraft in the military, and I know about all the all-weather aircraft. Like the F-117, the first stealth fighter, was built in late 1980s and early 1990s, and it was all tested in the desert. And this is a true story. I remember this as a lieutenant or a captain. They deployed the first ones over to Europe, and guess what? Within a week, we got a message that said, you can't fly these in the rain. And I'm like, how could you spend $50 billion on a program and you just deploy these, you can't fly them in the rain? Well, what was happening was there was some kind of the reflectivity was being affected by rain. And, I could give you these stories out the yin yang. So my job is to make sure that doesn't happen, right? That's my job. But I want to help these folks fly. I want to get the optimal airframe optimization because flying is money and being grounded costs money. And we don't want that, right? So that's a long answer, but you hit on a point that I had to make, right? And that is, we got to work together, and we have to build weather resiliency both in the airframe, but also in our systems, so that we can bring them together and get the maximum benefit.
No, you hit the nail on the head completely, Don, and I love that story with the aircrafts and not working in the rain, because essentially, with all about this public acceptance as well, with these eVTOL aircraft, they're not going to be fair weather aircraft, are they? We're not going to fly them in sort of blazing hot sun. There are going to be times where it's going to be snow, fog, and rain as well. So are you able to tell us a bit more then from True Weather Solutions then? How would it work then in the first instance then? What would you be doing then to try and build up this weather data to then pass on to these vehicle manufacturers that are building their own eVTOL aircraft?
So what True Weather is doing is, we started in 2015, and just to give you a little more background, not only was I an operator in the Air Force, I ran an Air Force base. So I'm a weatherman. I'm a meteorologist who ran Air Force bases, who has 300 hours flying as an air crew member back in the 80s, and has a lot of experience in building weather systems and in building these systems for optimizing operations with weather. So, but I also was a science and technology director at the Weather Service for 4 years. I had a $130 million budget. My job was to find the best science and technology that was in the labs and universities and unleash it to get into operations in the government. And, we call it the Valley of Death in weather because there's a lot of really good stuff that's not getting into operations. And that's another whole podcast, right? But the bottom line is that I started True Weather to accelerate unleashing that directly into industry. And we've built a platform that's very fungible and can take all kinds of different weather data sets and plug them in, and then add them to the system. And then we have an analytics layer that is focused just on UAS thresholds and eVTOL thresholds and pain points that produces something that is just something you can use out of the box and know you're getting the best of the best. Now, so that's the first step is we're coming out with TrueFlight and TrueFlight Vertical 360, which is a web application of it. And we're tying that, we're working with UTMs right now and actually getting our data into their systems. And we're working with some other companies that are taking our data in their and building risk management around planning flights and operations, and not just weather, but weather's a component of it. And I help them with the weighing of that and the understanding of the uncertainty so they get in the best use of the weather data. So that's what True Weather does, is we take what's out there and we optimize it and make it really valuable and useful and save money. So based on that, we can recover about 40% of the cost of weather on an operation today. And that is without new data sets. That's just taking the data that's available. Now, we're still aggregating data from around the world to get it into our systems, but we could get there. I could get it. If there's a business model, I know where to get it, all right? Now, in terms of the future, we want to then go beyond that 40% improvement. And by the way, just so you know, if you're a weather sensitive business or even an operator in the drone industry, depending on where you're flying, you're going to get about 5 to 15% of your operations budget is weather. You don't know it. Many people don't know it because it's baked in, right? It's baked into that person that goes out to the field and just sitting there doing nothing. And then you got to go back the next day and do it again. It just cost you double, right? Or maybe there could have been another job they could have done. And we've proven that already in the New York State test range. We actually have a use case just recently with the FAA UPP2 up and we saved 120 man hours in one day just by that. And that pays for our service almost for the whole year, almost in one shot for those guys. But my point is that there's a lot of waste there. But the second part of this is closing the gaps in the data. And that's where the uncertainty causes people to make decisions that maybe cause them the ground when they don't need the ground, or they don't have enough certainty and they don't make the right decision to cancel missions early enough where they can, use those resources elsewhere or give better predictability to their clients. So that's what we're working on here on out. And we're going to see that 40% get worked off over time as we get better sensing and we get that into our system and we turn that around. So we're going to grow with the industry. We're going to get better as we get more data. And that's why I'm really hot about the urban areas, because we need better data in urban areas. The urban area is really tough because of the buildings, right? And the fluid dynamics. And it's not cheap to run fluid dynamic models in weather. And so we need to build that business case and the amortization of that and the spreading of that cost so it becomes pennies a flight, eventually to an end user.
Great. No, thanks for that, Don, and wishing you all the very best going forward with True Weather, and would love to follow your developments going forward as well. But how have the think tanks, because you were involved in the last one with Van Vehicles about vertiports, but how have they helped you understand how urban air mobility will be implemented in Latin America, given it's one of the most densely urbanized areas in the world?
Well, I tell you, I see Latin America as, again, the green space for testing a lot of what I'm thinking about and just being integrated with folks like Felipe and I've met some other partners now. I'm having conversations with other companies that, we would have had, and I'm listening and learning too, right? I mean, I have a lot of experience, but, until we get that ground experience, until we actually get as many use cases and as much feedback and on what the pain points are and what the challenges are to the business models, and what they're worried about, what the clients are worried about, either the end users, the passengers, or the companies themselves. This is why I spend a lot of time working with folks like Felipe, because it's valuable for me to get that feedback. And, I'm constantly every day refining our approach. I mean, I know on a 80% level what we have to do, but now it's that last 20%, right, that we start filling in those details and figuring out how do we get sensors into the infrastructure? What's the right approach? Is it municipalities that we have to work with? Is it private sector investment? How do I get into those networks so that I can influence their thinking and show them how they can make the business cases and then hear what their challenges are? Well, Don, that's important, but I got to worry about this and this. And so then I have to refigure, all right, then how do I get around that objection, right? And I think the more I learn about all the system and the bureaucracy and the process, the better I could be and the more effective I could be at helping them reach their objectives. I mean, I'm used to working in bureaucracy. I mean, I worked in the government for 28 years. So I understand the natural tendencies of people in bureaucracies of how they're going to respond to what I'm going to say, because I have every use case of that. Now the question is how is it going to manifest itself in urban air mobility, and again, there are more innovative thinkers in urban air mobility. You don't have the same challenges that you have maybe in legacy areas. So I have to figure that out, right? And figure out where to go after the right messages and demonstrations. So that's why I think I'm excited. I hope we can go to Brazil. I hope we can go to Peru. I hope we could go, to these other countries that are going to also be, leading in this area. And I find it easier to work for me in South America sometimes than I do even in my own country, because there are a lot more objections. Now, again, maybe Felipe will get me in the back room and go, hey, Don, you haven't seen all the underbelly here yet. So, I'm glad you're optimistic, but you better put on your, get ready for, the same type of stuff. But I'm optimistic because you got people like Felipe and others who are thinking about this problem and trying to get ahead of it. And I think, associating with as many of those as possible is going to help us get forward, move this forward. Yep.
Completely agreed on as well. That it's all about that collaboration, isn't it? Working together to get to that end goal as well. You mentioned earlier in our conversation now, and also with the presentation that's also on the Skyscraper section of Van Vehicles website. Really enjoyed that, and about that change in the weather business model for aviation. Where do you think, as an industry in terms of urban air mobility, we could change it or help make it better for this new type of aircraft?
Well, what I hope happens is, more than hope. I mean, I'm trying to make it happen. But we're starting to see that people who fly beyond visual line of sight, irregardless of urban right now, let's just take a step back. They're coming to me now and saying, hey, you were right. I have to worry about having weather knowledge according to the regulations. I have to have weather knowledge of where I fly, and I'm not on the airplane. We underestimate how much the pilot heuristics help get me out of a bad forecast. All right. I mean, and that again is because of the uncertainty and the lack of data. Right. And so they're worried now because they realize that they're going to the regulators and say, hey, we want to fly this route. And they're saying, well, how are you going to maintain weather knowledge? And they go, well, I'll use the nearest METAR. Well, yeah, but that METAR is 20 miles away. It's not relevant for where you're flying. And then they go back and say, okay, then we'll put these low-cost weather sensors out there. By the way, this is true. This is not hypothetical. I can't tell you who, but I'm giving you a true story. And they come to me later, and I'm, after I've told them about this, but they said that, we got some low-cost weather sensors. And by the way, there are very good low-cost weather sensors. When they built the rules around certifying instruments for weather at airports, that was in the 1940s and 50s when nobody, it was new technology. You had to have those kind of rules. But now, you don't have to certify all these instruments because you got to certify the data, right? So what happened was this company went to their boss and said, hey, we're going to buy FAA said we can use this instrument, but, we can use it for this. We'll get a waiver to use it for this mission. But then they went back to their boss, and their boss said, well, if I buy this, am I going to be able to use it in the future? They went back to the FAA and go, no, it's not certified. So now they're in a catch-22. Now, the type of instrument you're talking about there is if you want to have a certified instrument, it's a $200,000 instrument. All right. And I did the math. If you want to put a grid of these around the whole country to have a 10-mile, a grid where you have a METAR kind of quality every 5, it's $8 billion, right? So, and that's 8 times the size of the National Weather Service annual budget. So, okay. So that ain't going to happen. So this is the catch-22 we're in, right? So I'm working with the FAA now, but we need the operators to come forward and say, no, we believe that this is the way we have to work with Don and the weather community to change the standards, to make them certified, certify the data and not the instruments. They've got to take the cause on with us because we can't do it ourselves. And that's where we need the industry to come back and say, we're going to take this weather thing seriously. We're going to support the weather industry or the people like Don who are trying to help us do better. And we're going to lobby for that. And, and we're going to work for that. And I think that's what we really need the industry to do right now. We need to take this seriously. If they wait 8 years, then it's going to take 8 years to fix it. Right. So now, we need to start now so that we can get all this paperwork and all, get the system and the ecosystem built so that, and then, convince the infrastructure providers that, yes, this will be used sensor. You're allowed to use this sensor, right? It's low cost, it's cheap, and we could get better data. Otherwise, who's going to put those sensors in if they're not assured that the states are going to approve it, right? That's what we can use to help on. Yep.
Again, really agree with that, Don. I think if we act now and we can use the experts like yourself in weather to make those strides before these aircrafts are operational, and it's only going to make so much sense and much easier when these operations are up and running. Do you think in weather's such important for this kind of aircraft, do you think we've kind of not given it the attention it deserves? We should have maybe been doing this years ago, do you think?
Oh, well, all right. I'll give you an example. Helicopters, right? Helicopters are the poor stepchild of aviation, right? So, if you look at all the airports and fixed wing aircraft and all the instrumentation you have around weather, you have microburst detection systems and you got all this stuff, and we spend all this money on that. Helicopters are ubiquitous. So I like to think of helicopters as kind of like, the kind of, it's the path forward that we're going to see with UAS, right? They're going to be ubiquitous. We're going to want to put vertiports in places that maybe have bad wake turbulence problems. So we want to stay away from those areas. We got to learn a lot by watching just what happened to helicopters. And helicopters, they'll tell you that the manned pilot gets them out of trouble a lot because there's not enough weather data. But there was never a business case big enough to say we need to close those gaps. So they've had to live with it, right? Take the man out of the cockpit or the woman out of the cockpit. You can't fly those things. I'm just telling you, because there's not enough data about ceiling and visibility and localized micro weather climates. So I think, yes, we should have been working on this a long time ago, but, like everything else in human history, we only solve the problems that are in our face, right? And we had mitigations and we were able to address it through those mitigations. The mitigation was the pilot, right? And putting all the emphasis on them and all the, saying you're responsible, for not crashing this thing. And, but now what are you going to do when there's no pilots in there, right? So I think, yeah, we should have been doing it, but, it's going to come to fruition now because you can't wish this away. Like you can't, I have not been able to figure out how you mitigate this in the same way other than you make really heavy and expensive airframes, right? And the other thing too, you got to think about is that it's not just about whether your aircraft can take it, take the turbulence and the G forces. You got to think about your clients. I mean, they're not going to want to throw up on the way to the airport. You give them one, somebody's dressed up, go on a business trip, and they're going, they're saying, oh, our aircraft can handle this, and they're getting sick and they throw up. They're not going to take that ride again. I mean, so, you got to be thinking proactively about the client experience too here, right? So anyway, that's how I view it. Yeah, we should have been doing a lot more, but I understand why we haven't.
Great. No, thanks ever so much for that, Don. And some really, really good points. Just leads me on to my sort of penultimate question, really. So what do you think, or what impact do you think True Weather Solutions can bring to the Latin America region as a result of its work with Vowing Vehicles? And I know that Felipe and the team have been doing a lot of work to help spread the word of the mobility issue in Latin America. But what impact do you think True Weather Solutions can bring to the region as it looks to implement urban air mobility?
Yeah, well, I believe that we have insights. Again, it's not that we're smarter than anybody else. We just have a lot of experience, right? And there's a commercial in the U.S., farmers commercial, it says, I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two, right? All the things that I'm thinking about, I've had problems in the past that taught me about these things. I'm just a victim of my past, right? So, people would be really smart to come to us because we have a blend of operations, technologists, and science that I don't think is easily achievable in one company. And it's not to say there's no pockets of excellence out there in other companies. We have one person that knows one part of it, But, when you're dealing with an ecosystem, you really need a one-stop shop, right? I mean, you want to get somebody, because I'm going to tell you, if I don't know some, my network is so vast, I could pull somebody in that will work with me, because I am a partnership kind of guy, and we're not trying to keep everyone out of the business. We're trying to build a consortium of companies. So I think one-stop shop on expertise, insight, thinking about systems, different types of sensing systems have to come into this. So you need more than one sensing company. We can make those determinations of how these sensors should be laid out. What are the best mix? How do we optimize them? How do we keep the cost down? So you're not, figuring out where the best placement is. So on the infrastructure side, and then taking that data and showing what we can do with it cost effectively to fill these gaps and improve those decisions. I think we're the end to end in that area. And I think that's what we could bring to, South America and to countries down there, because this is new. And the whole idea here is let's start, you got this clean slate. Let's do it right. Let's, and the last thing I'll mention is that I know very few operators who like to, they try to find a weather solution for something, and they get one widget from this person, one widget from this person. Plus, they're not experts. They don't know what they're getting, really. They think they know what they're getting. And then they have to integrate it. Well, that's what we're doing. We're going to be the integrator. We're not going to have, and I'm going to bring the best widgets in because I want to have the best service. So, I think that's the other thing we can bring to the fight in, I call it the fight because I'm in the military, but South America, help South American countries. And we want to do that. And we want to, I see it as the green space, like I said, and it's our back door to our neighbors to the south. And, we want you to be successful. I want you to be successful.
Great. No, thanks for that. And Don, and I'm sure it will be as well. Is there any final words you'd like to say?
I also took 5 years of Spanish in high school, so I really need to improve it's been so long that if I can have some interactions with people down there, maybe I can brush that up a little bit too.
No, that absolutely. I'm not even going to embarrass myself with the Spanish. So I did French at school, so I wouldn't possibly comment. But I really appreciate your time, Don. I think it's really insight and really, really important we talk about weather. Definitely want to continue the conversation going forward. But is there any final words as a conclusion you wanted to add about the think tanks that you were involved in, or about Vow Vehicles and their work to implement urban air mobility in Latin America?
Yeah, I just want to thank Felipe. He's a good soul. I really, believe that. He's worked with us. It's rare in business that you work with people that are not just about, what am I going to get out of this today? We're in an investment here, right? We're all working together. We know there you got to make money at some point, and there's going to be value to this. And we're not doing this because of just, I guess, our altruism. But the point is working with good people is so important, especially when you're working across borders, and because you don't know, right? You don't know. So I say that the think tanks that he's been putting on and you guys have been supporting him on have been outstanding. I hope that I can help Felipe and the group down there be successful in doing what they're trying to do. And I'm actually, honestly, I've been primed now. And I'm going to be doing a Middle Eastern show next week. And I was just on the phone in drones in Dubai, and everything that we've been doing in preparing for this and working with Felipe is now, it's fungible, right? And I got my messaging down, Felipe, so thanks. So, but no, it's all good. And I think, this is the way we're going to make our planet better. And this is the way we're going to, be successful at integrating these new technologies. In a thoughtful way, and in a way that society will accept them, and they'll really get the benefits of what is possible.
Excellent. No, really nice words as well there, Don, and really been great talking to you. Thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you for those that have been watching as well. Don't forget there are a huge amount of content available from a host of other companies, including Don at True Weather Solutions on www.vowvehicles.com/skyscraper. So Don, thank you very much for talking to me today, and thank you everyone for watching.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.